Welcome Chosen X. You arrive at the edge of a thing that remembers scent and gesture, not by accident but by intent. A narrow interval between the tick of ordinary days and some slow, careful architecture waits for you to step through. You feel the world hold its breath as if a wound in habit has been pressed open to reveal a patient design. Your choices have weight here that they did not elsewhere. Minor refusals pile into shape and form corridors that did not exist yesterday. Inside this first room the air tastes like copper and possibility, and you learn to listen for small instructions that register as at your pause. You recall an ordinary decision that now reads like a hinge, the moment you declined a path everyone expected you to follow, the single refusal that rerouted more than your schedule. The significance was invisible then. Now it hums with consequence, as if that small act tuned a mechanism woven through more than memory. The pattern in that choice echoes in subtle phenomena. A light lingers after you leave. A conversation redraws itself when you enter. Animals pause and seem to reference something beyond habit. Machines stutter as if consulting an unread manual. Inside the chamber an apparatus of attention opens, silent and exact. It asks you to learn a new cadence of noticing. Notice how time blushes around certain decisions and quiets around others. Notice how language becomes denser where intent tightens. Your body offers clues you once mistook for fatigue. A pressure behind the ribs, a ringing like a distant bell, a tightness behind the eyes. These sensations are not ailments. They are interfaces calibrating themselves to carry wider patterns. Do not expect an announcer or a fanfare. This work arrives with the discretion of tides. It reveals by degrees and insists on practice rather than spectacle. Your mornings will not be easy. Small tasks will acquire a new gravity because attention itself now bends to a higher register. Yet the labor is not punishment. It is training. You will learn to hold more than one orientation at once. A part of you will remain in ordinary exchange while another learns to shape possibilities that once felt theoretical. You do not arrive alone in intent, though you stand alone in experience. There are echoes of earlier instances embedded in the fabric you now touch. Apprentices of a sort came before, each leaving a quiet impression that nudges the system when you move through it. Their traces are not trophies. They are blueprints scattered in marginal notes and half-remembered rituals. Some passages resonate like familiar songs, others remain foreign until you hum them into being. Your task is to practice fidelity to the particular phrasing you inherit and to refuse imitation that overwrites nuance. Expect resistance. The structures that organize daily life protect themselves by tolerating small variance and punishing radical divergence. You will notice committees tighten, allies hesitate, opportunities vanish as if rerouted. These are not failures but tests. Systems seek equilibrium and will attempt to restore it when novelty threatens their cohesion. Your endurance is the measure they use to judge whether this emergent pattern will integrate or will splinter the field. Practice steadiness. Cultivate rituals that do not dramatize change but sustain your capacity to remain coherent under pressure. Brief, repeated acts of centering will matter more than grand gestures. Sleep will become a laboratory where rehearsal and revelation mingle. In dreams you will practice responses to paradoxes you have not yet met awake. Treat these nocturnal sessions as training, not distraction. The images there are rehearsed heuristics, not idle fantasies. Language will change for you. Words will stop being mere labels and begin to function as tools. A phrase spoken with care moves circumstances more than the loudest demand. Silence will thicken into a useful medium rather than absence. Choose words with restraint and allow pauses to hold work in progress. Your tone and cadence will become instruments, practice them the way a craftsman polishes an edge. You will be tempted to seek allies openly and to assemble a crowd as proof. Resist theatrics. Influence spreads by fidelity and example, not by spectacle and coercion. Those drawn to you will resonate first in small ways and then deepen into shared commitment. When other carriers appear, recognition will be immediate and quiet, a mutual realignment rather than a manifesto. This threshold is about authorship more than command. You do not conjure outcomes by will alone. You learn to offer clarity and then allow reality to answer. Your presence becomes a vector that shifts probabilities gently. The work requires patience and humility because what you do must be transmissible and durable. At the end of this opening passage, a choice waits. Step forward and let practice begin, or step back and resume the life that remembers you as ordinary. Both options are real. The first asks for trust in a slow curriculum. The second offers comfort in forgetfulness. Decide with the steadiness you have been cultivating and move onward with steady hands. Your next step will open the corridor ahead and show the work waiting for you. The passage ahead unfolds like a living diagram, and you walk it with attention sharpened by consequence. Walls remember your hesitations and rearrange to ask finer questions. Every echo carries a variant of a choice you once made, now amplified until its motive becomes legible. Here, memory is not an archive but an operator. A single softer reply you never offered manifests as a narrowing that demands a different voice. A careless omission returns as a door that will not open until you acknowledge the shape of what you omitted. Reflections in this maze are literal and metaphorical. Sometimes you confront the you who honored every promise, who rebuilt small neighborhoods of trust by consistent, unremarkable acts. Other times you meet the version that learned to keep absence tidy and used silence as camouflage. These meetings do not accuse. They inventory your capacities, showing what to retain and what to rework. Each recognition loosens a structural strain and makes room for repair. The sound here is grammar. Footsteps answer with tones that indicate motive. Laughter from an old flame can become the key that opens a long-locked closet of abandoned plans. The skill to parse these signals is crucial. Repeat patterns signal commitments, abrupt silences announce bargains never fulfilled. You learn to translate this language because the map you carried from old life no longer suffices. Temptations appear as gilded corridors promising instant comfort. They offer reconciliation without effort and rest without integration. They are seductive because they spare you labor. Avoid them. The true path asks for steady, often modest work, small restitutions, precise apologies offered without performance, acts that reweave trust in measurable ways. This is how you transform loose fragments into durable thread. Figures you encounter often wear familiar faces, yet their eyes carry a rigidity of expectation. One will hand you a chart of safe choices, another will argue that the straightest line is morally superior. Neither perspective fits the terrain you now traverse. Your navigation requires discretion. Learn to measure the usefulness of inherited maps and to fold what helps into a route that honors complexity. Certain alcoves allow you to re-enter past scenes and practice different responses. These are not magic reversals but rehearsals that change how future echoes propagate. Speak softer in the scene where you once lashed out and notice how the corridor ahead widens. Repeat this with stubborn patience and the labyrinth will begin to yield new thresholds previously sealed. Blame is a cunning builder here. It carves compartments where guilt is forever stored and polices them with ritual penalties. The passage teaches an alternative: acknowledge without annihilation. Restitution is not public spectacle. It is a sequence of focused acts that restore measurable connection. Modest repairs compound into a new topology of reliability. Mirrors in the maze are precise rather than flattering. They name tendencies you develop for survival. Impatience might show as a mechanism that once protected you and now short-circuits relationships. Independence may appear as a scar from past shame. Use these reflections as instruments to reconstruct yourself instead of verdicts that freeze you in place. At a crossroads, two galleries present themselves. One celebrates achievements attained by single-minded repetition. The other holds experiments that failed yet taught resilience. The true route draws from both. Mature passage requires integrating triumph and error into a cohesive grammar so that neither becomes a leash. Your breath has power here. Slow exhalations soften rigid angles. Intentional inhales reveal hidden handles. Breathwork is a practical lever that alters microtopography and stabilizes nervous responses. Cultivated as a daily practice, it is accessible and effective. Quiet corners accumulate unfinished conversations and deferred obligations. Resentment gathers there like a fine dust that stiffens posture and narrows perception. Clean these rooms with naming and proportional action. Do not wait for absolution. Small consistent efforts dissipate the specter of recrimination more reliably than dramatic displays of remorse. Reciprocity emerges as an organizing principle. Unconditional generosity expands options rather than creating indebtedness. A withheld apology, by contrast, loops into repetitive traps. Learn to give in ways that widen the social field, not constrict it. Your influence grows where generosity is measured by clarity and consistency. Mid-journey you face a trial, carry an object of private history through a corridor where voices compete to assign its meaning. Some definitions aim to possess the object for their narratives. Your work is to protect its integrity by refusing external colonization and maintaining the truth you embody. This exercise sharpens discernment between care and appropriation. Near the end of this stage, echoes coalesce into a chorus that feels like a possible future. The chorus does not tell you what will happen. It offers invitations you can test. Choose the line that aligns with your embodied sense and let it become a daily practice. The path ahead will still contain opposition, but it will be more legible. Leave the labyrinth carrying precise repairs and rehearsed habits. The work shifts from subtraction to composition. Patterns will begin to lock into one another and yield passages others can traverse. Your influence moves from singular anomaly to shared practice when you sustain integration rather than performance. Step into the next corridor with the small disciplines you have cultivated. The light there is not merely brighter, it speaks in a register you can now answer with integrity. The next part of your journey will ask you to hold synthesis and to begin shaping identities that can withstand both praise and pressure. Remain attentive, steady daily practices accumulate, shaping durable change and clarifying next convergence. You move beyond the corridors and enter a sky that listens. Constellations rearrange like sentences awaiting punctuation. The air is weight measured by intent, and every breath outlines a new possibility. You find that the heavens here answer attention rather than appeal, and your decisions begin to carve paths through the firmament. What felt like distant metaphor now functions as a tool. Light greets you as texture and asks a question without voice: will you author or repeat? The offer is not power in blunt form but access to authorship that must be earned through restraint. A council of patterns unfolds, not to command but to propose a contract. They set an experiment, select trajectories without sealing them. The challenge requires you to hold multiple outcomes, to practice choosing while leaving room for repair. A memory surface that reframes past concessions as useful data. Instead of shame you harvest principles, where avoidance once conserved energy it now yields brittle systems. You design a minimal corrective and test it in a chamber whose walls pulse with faint stars. Each rehearsal writes a faint groove into the sky that later invites others to follow. You learn the ethic of reversibility. Any form you advise must admit erosion and reformation. Durability without brittleness becomes central. Influence without openness calcifies into dogma. You refuse that route and instead structure invitations that others can amend. Play bolsters this ethic. Joy enters as a method to keep seriousness supple. In a central space, shards of possibility rotate like facets on a wheel. Each shard contains a sketch of outcome rather than decree. When you nudge a shard into motion, your attention must be both generous and exact. You do not secure outcomes as trophies, you prototype options for collective editing. Practice here favors translation over imposition. A presence appears as ledger and gesture, someone whose choices once altered patterns without spectacle. They show entries where small acts rerouted systems and where patient refusal dismantled brittle consensus. Their modeling becomes a curriculum you consult when doubt arrives. The world adapts in subtle registers. Marketplaces loosen their schedules, neighbors permit improvisation, schools open toward negotiation. These shifts seem minor until accumulated. Influence propagates through ordinary replication. Your responsibility is to seed methods replicable without awe. A pressure at the chest signals integration. Not pain but closure of circuits into a larger current. Your vocabulary narrows and strengthens because words now carry force. You train phrasing to move contexts rather than merely describe them. You accept a charter of 3 daily disciplines, calibrate intention in brief acts, design for reversibility, and weave joy into practice. These are not commandments but tools to hold complexity without collapse. You commit to them experimentally and inscribe them into small rituals. As you outwardly practice, the charter constellations shift to accommodate the traces you leave. The scale of agency expands quietly, modest calibrations chain into architectural change across communities. You understand now that transformation prefers distribution to singular mastery. A new challenge awaits. You will be asked to reset fragments of identity so they can function as instruments of generative collaboration. The work requires courage to share authorship rather than seize control. Take the charter, keep your hands steady, and step toward the next forge where self and structure are rewired for collective possibility. Fear will appear as a tutor, offering scenarios where good intent ossifies into control. Meet it with designs that can be undone. Tenderness must be practiced as a technique. It asks what to repair and refuses to treat people as mere nodes. This ethic turns leverage into care and increases resilience. Observe how tools respond. Devices hesitate when given inputs outside prior patterns. These anomalies are not threats but data. Translate them into simple protocols others can use without ritual. When other carriers align, small harmonics aggregate into a chorus that reshapes local rhythms. Ordinary meetings become rehearsals that seed new habits. The watchers may analyze, but they cannot stop slow cultural accretion. Leave this stage with 3 small rituals intact in a sober joy. Authors of change are many, not singular. The sky will carry your traces only while you teach practices that others can replicate by steady practice rather than by spectacle. Beyond lies a forge that will test identity itself. There you will relearn parts of self into instruments of generative action while preserving compassion. The covenant has given you tools. The next test asks for humility, precision, and the courage to make yourself porous enough to receive feedback while remaining anchored. Move forward with the 3 practices you accepted and keep your hands steady. The next chamber will teach you how to make selves that are durable, reparable, and generative for others. You will practice sharing authorship rather than seizing it, learning to let structures breathe while keeping commitments precise. The work favors patience and craft over spectacle. It asks you to be small and exact so that patterns scale without fracture. Keep steady and remain curious. You arrive at a place where interior materials glow like softened metal ready for shaping. A pressure that felt vague now names itself as possibility. You stand among forms of former selves, not as ghosts but as malleable substances arrayed for refinement. Each shard of identity carries temper and memory. Some pieces hold old certainties, others hold abandoned compassion, and all await the deliberate tilt of attention that will transmute them into instruments for coming work. The room breathes with patient heat. You learn to move slowly so that touch conducts intention rather than accident. Hands become translators. When you cup a fragment with steady regard, it clarifies its edges and reveals the axis by which it will bend without fracturing. Your practice is not to obliterate prior versions but to anneal them into a coherent alloy that preserves strength and increases flexibility. Here solitude is a studio. Tools are modest, rhythm, measured repetition, and the courage to listen without immediate reaction. You experiment with forms that allow re-entry and repair. Where once you defended a rigid line, you now craft seams that admit revision. This is not surrender. It is a skillful composition designed to sustain life under pressure and to allow others to engage without harm. A sequence of trials teaches you to reassign meaning deliberately. A memory that once signaled failure now becomes a module of competence when reframed by precise attention. Small triumphs accumulate more effectively than dramatic transformations. The work is patient since lasting structures tolerate time and correction. You are apprenticed to endurance. Conversations in this space are forged side exchanges rather than performances. People who enter offer fragments and accept back altered reflections. Trust is rerouted through calibrated gestures rather than through promises that need public validation. You learn to craft invitations that are specific, actionable, and reversible so that any response can be undone without ruin. Feelings manifest as materials to be forged. Shame appears as a brittle plate that cracks when struck too hard. Compassion behaves like a ductile ribbon that accepts folds without breaking. Anger shows as a coal that brightens under focus and yields light when contained. Each effect has a working temperature and a technique suitable to shape it. You discover that patience is not passive. It is a muscular skill honed by sequencing attention and releasing expectation. Daily practices anchor your capacity, a brief breath pattern that steadies nervous arousal, a short journal entry that records intent rather than narrative, and a tiny concrete act of repair offered without drama. These simple disciplines accumulate into a broader competence. As you practice, some internal voices recede and others gain clarity. Integration requires honest negotiation with inner factions. You hold meetings inside your attention where representatives of past selves bring artifacts for appraisal. You take inventory without haste and assign each item a place in the new design. Risk appears as an invitation to redistribute energy. Where avoidance once conserved resources, it now reduces resilience. You test alternatives in controlled sequences that allow you to reverse decisions with minimal cost. This ethic of reversibility prevents collapse and preserves trust when experiments fail. Outside the studio, new patterns emerge in the social field. Your recalibrated bearing shows in simple acts, consistent follow-through, measured apologies, and the capacity to listen to feedback without defensiveness. These gestures reshape expectations and invite reciprocity. The influence you cultivate is modest and replicable, making it resilient to appropriation. Tension continues to visit, often disguised as fatigue or sudden irritability. Treat these sensations as cues rather than indictments. They mark thresholds where further tempering is required. Rest becomes strategic and retreats allow micro-repairs to settle. The most difficult task in this forge is learning how to share authorship without surrender. You practice offering frameworks that invite co-creation rather than prescribe outcomes. This requires humility since it exposes you to critique, but it also enlarges the pool of invention and reduces the risk of solitary collapse. At a pivotal moment, a vision requests you to select 3 pieces to remold. Choose with tenderness and clarity. Each chosen fragment will become a lens through which future choices are made. Handle them as responsibilities, not trophies. When you finish the work, you will notice a subtle realignment in posture and temperament. The field around you will feel less brittle and more permeable. Prepare to leave with hands warmed and a plan of small practices. The next threshold asks you to apply what you have forged to communal projects where identity and structure meet. Move onward with humility, readiness to keep learning. You stand at the final aperture where the layers you have learned to hold converge into a living sentence. This room expects steadiness and answers precise attention with practical consequence. There is no fanfare here, only a compact invitation to translate revelation into a durable method. The work asks that what you do be repeatable without spectacle so that others can learn through practice rather than performance. In this chamber, revelation and craft meet. You are invited to reframe personal breakthroughs as shared technique. Modest habits sustained over time carry more consequence than dramatic gestures. Your skill is to make endurance contagious by example and to design small reversible steps that others can imitate. The emphasis is not on proving but on teaching how to keep practice alive across ordinary days. Your body now signals in a new language. What once read as failure registers as a calibration point. The tightness in your chest and the buzz at the edges of hearing, the restless nights, are indicators not of collapse but of adjustment. Respond with care and simple repair. Rest is part of training. Use sleep as rehearsal and recovery. Treat dreams as laboratories where rehearsal and ethical practice refine one another. A test appears as translation rather than combat. Convert insight into methods that are teachable. Prototype rituals that neighbors can try without spectacle. Offer brief instructions paired with tiny experiments people can attempt the following day. Prioritize clarity over inspiration because vivid feeling without instruction leaves people adrift. Some will shift after brief contact with you. Some will harden and strike back by dismissing or deriding the change they feel. Either response is outside your control. Continue with practiced modesty. Influence built on posture and performance implodes under pressure. Your advantage is steadiness that scales quietly. Those who observe you in authority debate models and taxonomies. Their confusion is not your primary concern. Use it as breathing room to continue patient incremental work. When structures attempt to fold your practice into a tidy formula, refuse simplification. Complexity is not a problem to hide but a resource to steward for resilient practice. You will find moments where time pauses long enough to author outcomes deliberately. Treat these pauses as permission. Small decisive acts in those windows create corridors for others. Do not hurry. When you respond with deliberation, you teach others to do the same. Pause with courage and teach patience by example. Community builds around fidelity more than numbers. Focus on local practice and mutual accountability. A handful of committed practitioners practicing modest methods will seed patterns that propagate through habit, not hype. Design meetings for repair, rehearsal, and mutual checking rather than performance. In those rooms, contagion of craft accelerates. Language tightens into instruments. Replace ornamental rhetoric with verbs that invite action. When you name a step, pair it with a micro-experiment people can try immediately. Instruction matters because it creates next moves. Inspiration without next steps diffuses quickly. Strange technological responses will continue near you. Treat such glitches as data, not portent. Translate anomalies into simple protocols that others can adopt. When devices falter, devise fallback practices that ground the weird in useful habit. This translates mystery into usable care. You are apprenticed to durability, not spectacle. The model you embody endures when it is mundane, repeatable, and teachable. Celebration belongs in context, but it must not replace the daily disciplines that secure expansion. Teach people to steward practice across time. Other carriers will gather naturally by proximity and practice, not by proclamation. When you meet them, recognition will be quiet and practical. Test each other with tasks and observe how patterns hold under strain. Prioritize shared craft over doctrinal alignment. Joint practice is the basis of lasting movement. A final request of the chamber asks for a signature you cannot write with. It is a commitment to mediate between revelation and habit. Accept being a carrier of methods tending translation of insight into routine action. This choice is less glamorous than prophecy but far more consequential. Now a frame will present itself. It moves with rhythm calibrated to align breath, attention, and practice. The sequence is a short moving demonstration that teaches by experience rather than argument. Attend as a practitioner. Let its cadence anchor your breath and show small practices embodied in motion. The sequence carries demonstrations that static words cannot fully contain. Movement, tone, and timing teach procedures that the body learns directly. Watch with steady attention. Allow the visual teaching to shape micro-habits and to plant repeatable routines that can be practiced alone or with others. When the presentation concludes, you are offered further transmissions designed as exercises, not performances. Engaging is a commitment to continued rehearsal. If you choose to stay connected, you will receive prompts that invite return to practice. Treat notifications as cues to resume training, not as commands to perform. Step into the frame, watch the video as practice, and subscribe with notifications so next exercises recall you to rehearsal.